Today I want to explain how to read the residential resale condominium purchase contract. This is the purchase contract that everybody is signing in their car on the go. Nobody reads anything. So I think it's very important to go through this and actually understand what is it that you're initialing and signing. So this is the Alberta Real Estate Association standard contract. If somebody sends you something else, unless it's a new build and you have a builder's contract, do not play with that. This is a legally binding document that needs to be filled out properly. Okay, first of all, the sellers. You're going to see the names of the sellers. You're going to put your name as a buyer right here, and of course if you're in the seller position, it's going to be here. This is going to be the address. This is going to be the project name. So if you're living in a condominium complex, sometimes they have beautiful names like the Waterfalls of Varsity or something more poetic. Then these numbers are the plan, unit, and unit factor number. These are numbers that we are taking from the land title. Very important to put these in here. Do not be confused if the unit number is different than the municipal address number. Parking units, again, depending if the unit is coming with a parking stall or not. We have to, if it's titled, we have to put it here, and the unit number and the unit factor. Same with the storage unit. If we have a titled storage unit, it's yours. If it's assigned or leased, we mention it here. We mention how many stalls, what's the specifications of these, and there are differences between titled units and assigned units. Assigned can change. Titled come with the unit always. Leased, sometimes there are wait lists for leased areas, and that can apply to storage and to parking as well. As far as unattached goods, these would be all of your appliances. So we would just put a list of things that come with the house. So if there is or with the condo, if there is a dishwasher, fridge, stove, hood fan, maybe microwave that's built in, maybe there's a fancy light fixture that you like and that you want to keep. It's usually window coverings, garage openers, if there's an extra freezer, if there's an extra fridge, maybe there's some shelving in the basement or in the garage. Everything that comes with the house we will put here. And sometimes the sellers will decide that they don't want to give up their fancy chandelier in the hallway. So if they don't want to include some of the items, they will put it right here. This is going to be our purchase price. We can do another video on this, but this will be somewhere around the asking price. It could be way less, it could be way more, it could be just bang on the purchase price, and it could also be strike through a few times and then rewritten and initialed again. This is important to see that this price includes the GST, so there's no additional fees. This contract will be completed and the vacant possession will be given at noon, which is not given, but that's an estimate on the date, so we'll pick the date. And if we are buying a property with tenants, then we would strike through the vacant word here, and we would add that we are assuming the tenants. So this is important, that the seller represents and warrants that on completion day the property will be in the same condition as when the contract was accepted. So if there are any accidents, any whatever can happen, everything has to be in normal working order on possession date. So until you take over the property, until you give up the property on this day, you are responsible for everything, and that includes hail, that includes any furnace breaking down, that can include windows being smashed, anything has to be fixed and in normal working order, as in the same condition when this contract was accepted. All right, we're going to take a few seconds to read through these, the general terms, and basically this is just very simply said that each of the buyer and the seller are represented by their own agents, and there's no conflict of interest. The laws apply, of course. Alberta time applies, so if somebody is buying from Vancouver, possibly, or from another part of the city, from Ontario, if it says 9 p.m. on this contract, it is 9 p.m. in Alberta. Business days, of course. Right, this is important. So the seller has to disclose any material latent defects. Those are things that cannot be seen or discovered through an inspection. So if you know that you have a crack in the foundation and you just put new flooring all over it and you're pretending that there's no crack, this is bad. The seller has to disclose all the defects that could be expensive to fix. And G, of course, everybody is responsible for completing their own due diligence and assuming the risks. Okay? So, and the risks, and you guys are acknowledging that the documents, that this refers to the condo documents, may be relevant to purchasing this property. And that the buyer can request additional information and all of these things. So it all comes with the due diligence that your agent or myself should be able to help you with. And then the seller ensures that the representations and warranties he is reviewing, we are all reviewing, and the lawyers are reviewing the land titles and all the registrations. If there is an RPR or that needs to be reviewed, then they are reviewing that. We gotta determine the non-resident status for income tax purposes, dower rights, which are the rights that talk about spouses having rights when it comes to the sale of the property, and maybe the spouse is not on the title, but the spouse has resided in the home, and any other research needed. The buyer may get inspections or advice on the condominium documents. Of course, you can use professionals to do this and help you with this. Other items important to the buyer. Seller and buyer will read this contract and seek advice before signing it. This never happens. The mortgages, the brokerages, the real estate board may collect information, of course. And so the deposit, the seller's brokerage will be appointed and will be provided with this contract and all the other documents, and then they will contact the buyer's brokerage and send them all the paperwork. The deposit is an important part of the contract, so we would put the seller's brokerage, for example, if it's Remax First, we would put Remax First here as a trustee, and the buyer would have to pay the deposit depending on the purchase price of the home. It could be anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on, again, how high we're in the purchase price and what's your financial situation. You need to have this money on hand. You're going to be delivering it by a bank draft or a wire transfer. Wire transfer is usually a little bit more expensive, but the bank draft costs like $7 and the wire transfer like $27. And we have to deliver this within a few days of acceptance of the purchase contract. It's usually the second day or the third day. Sometimes if the buyer does not have the deposit on hand, maybe he has 10,000 and then another 10,000 next week, we can add an additional deposit here. If the deposit is not delivered by the agreed date, this one, the seller may void this contract, and he can basically sell the house to somebody else. So make sure we do this, and we are good with the date. The trustee will deposit all deposits into the trust account, of course. Interest, there's no interest. These are 0% interest trust accounts. The deposit will be held in trust for both of the parties of the transactions. So even, if you think that you are entitled to get the deposit, it is not up to us, it is up to the brokerage. And again, the deposits will be dispersed without prior notice to the buyer if after contract is accepted, if the condition is not satisfied, which means the buyer is not buying the house, so the deposit is returnable, or if the buyer voids the contract for the seller's failure to provide dower consent or acknowledgement. So yeah, if the deal is not going through within the conditional period, this deposit will go back to the buyer. And of course, if the seller fails to perform this contract, and if the seller voids this contract, and the deposit will be dispersed to the seller if this contract is accepted and conditions are satisfied. So if you do your inspection, you do your financing, and you waive the conditions, but then something happens and you fail to take over the home, basically, whatever can happen. You can lose your job, the bank will decide you don't have a job now, you're not getting the mortgage. So in that case, you would lose the deposit. If you find this out like a week prior to the possession date, or any time after the condition period is over. And it is going to be applied towards the fee owned by the seller. And so the money that you put into the trust account will be dispersed between a few people. It will be the seller and it will be the real estate agents as well. All right. Land title. So this is more on the lawyer side of the transaction, but we have to make sure that the property is free of all encumbrances, liens, and interests, except of those implied by law, and non-financial obligations, of course, easements, utility rights of way. This is when the city of Calgary has to have access to your property because they have electricity box or some important plumbing that goes through your property, covenants, conditions, homeowners associations. So all of these things are normal and okay. We're just looking for really anything that could be endangering the value. All right, representation warranties. This is important. So the seller again warrants to the buyer that he has the right to sell the property. He is not a non-resident, so that means he is a resident of Alberta for the tax reasons. No one has a legal right to the attached or unattached goods, so he owns everything that's in the house and that's being sold with the house. The current use of the land and buildings are, of course, it's not used, as something that would not comply with the law, the location and improvements. So all of this is basically for the seller. This is what the seller is telling us, that all of everything that they're selling is in an okay state. So again, the defects and lack of permits, those have to be disclosed in writing again. The representations and warranties are made of true by completion date, of course, and was arrived the completion. Dower. So this is again if the people are legally married, and if one of the spouses is not listed as the owner of the house, they still have to agree to the sale of the place. So if the dower rights apply, the seller has to have the non-owner spouse to sign this contract as well, and they have to provide a dower consent and acknowledgement, which is a piece of paper that they sign in front of a lawyer, and we would put a date right here if that applies. Conditions. So this is very important for all buyers, and I always say don't go unconditional, because it can bite you. Of course, depending on the market conditions, sometimes you have to get a good deal or to be competitive enough. Buyer's conditions are the most common ones are condominium documents. So we would put time and a date here while you have time to, it's usually about a week. 5 business days should be enough for this. If you get lucky, you can take 2 weeks to review them. Hopefully the sellers have all the condo docs, and you can spend a lot of time reading through them, or you can hire somebody who will give you a nice summary and who will flag any deficiencies. Condo documents are super important because they will tell you about the reserve funds, about any planned repairs in the near future, and the costs of those repairs. And of course, when you are buying a condo, you are always worried about the condo fees, and the condo fees are very much connected to these condo documents, because the docs are documenting what is happening with the condo fees, with the contributions, monthly contributions, how these are being placed, and what is what's planned in the near future. The seller has to give the buyer all the documents, so you as a buyer should not be buying any, because they are pretty expensive. And if they don't deliver the documents by the date that we select here, we have to give them a written notice and extend the date to a different date. Sometimes the condo management companies will take their time to prepare some of the docs. So this is also important. So there is a reasonable cost to obtain the missing documents, and those may be invoiced to the seller. And in addition to the docs, the seller should be providing all copies of all the documents that could be needed. All right, here we have the list of the documents, which we don't really have to read through. It's just for you to know. So it's the budget, it's the management agreement, it's the financials, it's the bylaws. Those are very important because those will tell you if you are or not allowed to have pets in there, have kids in the building, have parties, or put stuff out on the balconies, and all those everyday things that you should care about. Also insurance and all of these things. All right. The next condition is financing. Financing means you are taking on a loan. You don't have cash to buy this property, so you will have to put a date here. If you do have a pre-approval, we should be fine with 7 business days, sometimes even 5. If you don't have a pre-approval, please have a pre-approval before we are putting an offer together, because it takes longer, especially if you don't have your papers in order. Property inspection, very important step. You don't know what's behind the walls, you don't know what the plumbing is, you don't know what the potential issues, leaks, heat losses are, so always get a qualified inspector and licensed home inspector, and let's go and let's do the inspection. It also gives us a perfect chance to spend some time in the property. Sometimes you need to sell first in order to buy, so we would put a date here and we would have to fill out a special form that is the sale of the buyer's property schedule. And if the buyer has any additional conditions, this could be a identity verification of the buyer, of the seller, or anything basically. Then we would put it right here. Seller's condition. Also, the seller can have some conditions, some due diligence on the buyer. They usually don't, but it could happen. Okay, we are behind the middle part now. So, condition notices. Each party will give their written notice that we are sending the waiver. And if not, this contract will end on condition date, or the condition is not waived and the contract is ending when we give that notice. So if we do the inspection here and we find out that there is, I don't know, something potentially dangerous or very expensive to fix, and the buyer decides to not buy this place, we will send a non-waiver and the contract ends with that. These are some additional documents that are important if we are working on any creative financing, if there is a tenant involved, if this is a manufactured home, if the buyer needs to sell first prior to buy, or any other addendums. This is also very important to mention that how much are the current monthly condo fees, and if any other monthly fees are being paid for any other areas. Other terms, we would put a final walkthrough here, just so we can check if the day before possession, if the property is really in the functioning state as it was when we signed this contract. All right, the closing process is on the lawyer's side, so we can just skip quickly through these paragraphs here. So the lawyers will deliver the closing documents to each other. They will need some days to confirm the registration of documents at the land titles office. And if the property is a bare land condo, the closing documents should have the RPR as well. Most units are conventional condominiums. Bare lands are usually villas or townhouses in a few locations in Calgary, so there's not a lot of them. The lawyers have to pull an estoppel certificate to verify that all the condominium fees have been paid, and if there is any outstanding amount for the seller to pay. And then we've got the payments and the costs. So the buyer will pay the purchase price by bank draft again, or a trust check. Regardless, right, so special assessments, Special assessments are things that, those are the expensive repairs in condominium complexes. And the seller is responsible for the special assessment payments past a resolution on or before the completion date, of course. And then the buyer is taking over those special assessments on completion date. Items, property taxes, fees, utilities, rents, same thing, right? We take over all of those since completion date. The seller's lawyer may use the price to pay any of the seller's financial obligations related to the property. So if somebody is owing condo fees and haven't been paying, those will be paid off from the price. And again, reasonable time, evidence of all of these discharges, and if there is any outstanding amounts, evidence of verifying payments. If the seller has entered into a agreement with a real estate agent, a real estate brokerage, there will be a fee to pay to the seller's brokerage, and the seller will pay the costs of prepare the closing documents, including of the new RPR. So the buyer really is paying only for the legal work on their side. The buyer will pay the cost from their side. And the closing costs. If the seller fails to deliver the closing documents to the lawyers, the buyer there will be a late interest, and it will be delayed until the buyer or buyer's lawyer has received the documents. So this is very important to stay in touch with the lawyers, stay on top of them, remind them that the possession date is coming up. And if the buyer is willing to and able to close this contract and wants to take possession of the property, then the seller will give the buyer possession upon reasonable terms, which will include the payment of the late interest only of amount of mortgage being obtained. Okay. Again, the late payments can be dealt with. This is, again, the closing dates more on the lawyer's side, but it is important to have it in this contract here. We've got the 3% late interest. Okay, we're moving on to the insurance. The seller bears any risks of loss or damage until the purchase price is paid. So even on the possession date, let's say the possession date is October 1st at noon, and the day before, the night before, we had a big hailstorm, and now the roof is all done. It is the seller's risk, and he still has to deal with his insurance in a case like this. And here are some options for some remedies if buyer fails or refuses to complete this contract, and the same thing with on buyer default, what happens, and if seller and buyer agree that the property is unique. Specific, okay, so that this is nothing really specific here. Notices and documents. And notice under this contract means that this is a written document. This is just the formal side of things. So how we deliver these forms to each other, how that we are accepting the electronic signatures. Giving notice means that the document is transmitted on one of these methods, and we usually confirm this by a phone call anyways. And so here we have the representation, so seller's brokerage and then buyer's brokerage. I am putting myself in here. My contact info, and then if the seller authorizes somebody else or the buyers authorize somebody else, we would put that in here. Confirmation of the contract terms. That there are no side agreements or warranties or representation made by either the seller or the buyer, and have not or will be not relied on as a part of this contract. Any pre-contractual representation or warranties are no legal force, so this is also very important. What's not on paper doesn't count. The legal obligation, of course. So this is starting when we deliver and everybody signs, and this is the place for the final signatures. This is when we are keeping our offer open until, so let's say it would be tomorrow evening, so the seller has some time to decide if they want to work with us or no. Signature date, and if the seller accepts it, they will sign it right here. Same thing, signed at a city on a date, seller signature. Sometimes we do witnesses if it's not an electronic signature. And if we have the non-owner spouse, then this would be their spot. And if the seller does not accept our offer, they would fill out this rejection part. And that's it. Hope it helped.